who works with people who are just as stressed out as we are, if not more, and only a little bit older. So she's got a lot of really good tips. And she is wonderful. So please give her a warm round of applause. Absolutely.
Okay, to give the wet here, I went to the gym. And my friends from college would be like, this is very typical. So you guys are all very buttoned up and I am not. So it'll dry quickly. Yeah, so thank you for having me. I appreciate it. How many of you came in with questions tonight or just came? I'm curious how much time I should save at the end. I want to make sure that I answer your questions. So if you could just raise your hand if you might have a question for me so that I make sure that I and I understand that some of that might come up as we talk to you today, but just want to allow time, and I tend to be a little bit tangential and verbose, so I'll try not to do that. It won't seem to advance unless I'm doing something wrong. Just the arrows.
Try again.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, just a brief introduction. I'm one of the clinical therapists at Ohio State's vet school. There are actually two of us. So we're both embedded there. I don't like where the screen is, sorry. We're both embedded. We're not affiliated with main campus counseling. So the vet school has us just there for vet students on purpose because, as you can imagine, the vet students have a pretty crazy schedule. And so they want us to be accessible and available. So they don't want students to even have to walk across campus because of time. So we're right there on campus. The other therapist's name is Katie Reed. She's a psychologist. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I've been there, I think, 7 years, and she's been there about 6 years. So we've both been there a while. We both heard a lot about Ohio State's program here, different ways that you can come to vet school. So I would say you are all probably about as stressed, if not more, than the vet students, but for different reasons. And so, yeah, so I also a registered yoga teacher, so I teach yoga classes for the vet school. I used to do public classes and I stopped doing that. So I host them just in the Wenger lab if you've ever been at the vet school. So we push all those red chairs out of the way. It's not quite the atmosphere that I would like, but we do what we can. So that's another thing that I do there. I did want to remind you, that you probably already know, that you do have access to the counseling and consultation service. And I know that sometimes they're hard to access. And so if you ever did have a question around mental health or how to get access or those types of things, please don't feel like you don't have anywhere to turn around that. I'm welcome to answer any questions I can to get you linked. I'm only able to see people at the vet school. So that includes the grad students too. We have pretty good subset of grad students with us there. But I did want to kind of remind you that that's available to you. Same with crisis services. So I won't review them. I just included them in the slides. So I assume everybody can have access to the slides. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So I did want to review a little bit of data on the veterinary profession. So are you guys aware that the veterinary profession has had some struggles with mental health? Okay. Not news. Okay. So tell me what the types of things that you guys have heard. You can just shout it out or you can raise your hand or yeah.
You're the highest suicide rate out of it.
Okay. Suicide rate. Definitely suicidal ideation in the most recent surveys that they did. There's lots of thoughts about suicide. And then also in turn, what's interesting, worry about thoughts about suicide was more prevalent this time around than suicidal thoughts itself. It's kind of like, what if I end up mentally ill, or what if somebody I care about ends up with a problem? So, but yes. Burnout, 100%.
Dealing with like perfectionism, not being able to meet that.
Yes, bad things happen all the time, unfortunately, typically. So it's hard to deal with that. Yes.
Just the field can be kind of old fashioned, so there's not a lot of space to talk about it.
Correct. So that's getting a little better, but yes. So what we're hoping is through education and curricular things within the vet schools that will take over the world, the veterinary world, and that will start to turn that around a bit. And I will say in my 6 years, things have improved even within that time span in terms of resources, literature, things like that. And there's still a long way to go, but yes, that is true. Anything else? Thing over here? No, okay, stay away from over here. They're like, "Oh." Okay, so we've named most of these already. And so I won't read them to you, but yeah, you guys are on the right track. There's also some support around substance abuse. So as a way of coping with stress or coping with the burnout or the difficulties in the profession, that there's higher rates of substance use. It's not really that uncommon in helping professions. So helping professions in general struggle with substance use, because usually we get into the profession because we want to make a difference or we care about whatever chosen field we have. And you know, it's human nature. So it's not just vet med, but substance abuse is also a concern. And then this information was specific to that students. So can you all still hear me okay with that? Okay. So this was several years ago, so they probably have, there is probably updated information, but this was a study that was done that looked just at depression. So you can see that in veterinary students specifically, the mean score was basically reaching the clinical cutoff for depression. So, and 43% of individuals that were in that study met criteria for clinical depression. So the way that I frame that to students is that when we think about that from a mental health standpoint, some of those individuals had predisposition for depression, so they came into school with depression. Some students develop depression over the course of the time that they're in school, and that looks a little different. So what we would call that instead is an adjustment disorder. So that the stress of school or the environment that you're in is causing the depression. And so this did not tease out the difference between those things. It had them both together, but it's still kind of alarming, right? So if the mean score is clinically depressed, then you can imagine there's people that are above that and some that are below. So any questions so far or comments? Okay. Needed high heels. Okay, same thing with stress. So we use the perceived stress inventory for this. So this isn't a diagnostic measure, so this doesn't diagnose anxiety, but it does show a snapshot, let's say, of stress. So here, 54% scored higher than average. Mean score was 18.3, which is pretty high. And actually, when we did this with vet students, they were scoring at OSU, they were scoring higher than someone who would be considered debilitated. So, and yet you wouldn't know that, right? So what that means is, and I always try to remind people, is that you all tend to have a pretty high resiliency to it. So sometimes you don't even realize how intense you're feeling that until you take an inventory and look at it. And we know from the data that the stress is high, yes.
Both this one and the one previous had scored numbers, but what's the scale?
Good question. So I could send that to you if you give me your email, because it's in my notes, which I don't think I included in the PDF version of this, but I could let you know. All right, so they are both clinically significant. I know that. That's a great question. Will you touch base with me after and then I get your email? Okay, that's a great question. Okay. Okay, so the other thing with stress is that, and I often hear this when I'm meeting with students, is that they don't want to feel stressed anymore, or they want to feel good. And so sometimes our ideals or our perfectionism get in the way because we actually cannot make stress go away. Stress is something that we all experience. It's part of being human, and it's not always bad. So there are times when stress can actually be helpful. So an example is, I'm sure some of you are here because you want to maybe go to vet school. I would assume. How many people want to go to vet school? Okay, so there's some stress, right, about getting into vet school. There, I recognize that that's not the easiest task to do. So in order to get into vet school, there's certain things that you need to do, and that stress helps you do those things in order to get in and achieve your goals. So sometimes we need stress to have motivation. But there's also times that stress obviously is debilitating or difficult. And so that's what we are more concerned with, but it's not always a bad thing. I do often hear too, if I'm stressed, that means I'm not doing something correct, or I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not handling things well, or like fill in the blank. I'm weak, I'm not like other students, or I'm less than, and it's not necessarily the case. Again, it's just part of life. So it can't go away. So let's talk about why. I'm sure you've reviewed the nervous system before, I would think. And so that's why I like vet students, and I don't have to explain really anything to them. Or they teach me things all the time. I don't think it's screwed up your screen, I'm sorry. There we go. And so does anyone need me to review the nervous system? Yes, you,
Yeah,
it's been a minute. That's not good. Okay, so the nervous system is comprised of autonomic and somatic. So autonomic is involuntary things like heart rate, respiration, vital function as you see, or involuntary functions of the body. Somatic, I always get them confused, so I'm looking, make sure I'm saying it right, are the voluntary things. So like throw a ball, kick the ball, click the button kind of things, right? Does that make sense? Okay, and then this is broken down again. So the autonomic part, the involuntary, and the vital function part, oops, is broken down into two. So sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic is when we're stressed. So it's our fight, flight response. And then the parasympathetic is rest and digest. So it gets activated when we sleep, when we do things that calm our nervous system down. Does that make sense? So we all have a primal response to survive and defend ourselves. And we're honestly in that way a lot like animals. So we have a prefrontal cortex, so we can think and reason a little bit better. I know that's debatable. Sometimes we're like, no, my cat can reason for sure, or you know, but yeah, so we do function in that way a bit like animals. So when we get threatened, we do have a tendency to click into fight, flight, or freeze. Just like animals do. So I'm sure you can think of animals that when they're backed into a corner, they're gonna fight, animals that would freeze, and animals that might run, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So when this is problematic, because we all have it a bit, right? And some of it's good, again, like I'm hungry. I feel a little bit of stress about that. I'm gonna go get food and feed myself, and then I feel better, and it's a complete cycle. But if you're like, I'm worried about the test that's coming up, and there's no resolution until 2 weeks from now, you're kind of clicked into sympathetic. And when that's chronically turned on without any relief or recovery, then that's when we get chronically stressed. Or when the perceived stress scale would be elevated to a point that's clinically significant. So any questions about that before we move on from that? Do you have any questions? You're processing, I can see. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about are some things that are evidence-based that give you rest and digest, other than sleep. Sleep is probably one of the most helpful things that you can do. And I know that sometimes that's annoying because we don't have enough time, or we can't always control our sleep, right? So I definitely go to sleep some nights and can't fall asleep, or I wake up in the night. And so it's not always 100% in our control, but sleep is one of the most helpful things that we can do. I have to talk about yoga because I teach yoga. I recognize that yoga is not for everybody. There are certainly people in our college that are like, sure, I love it, or I'll try it. And other people that are like, oh, no, there's no way. So I try to teach it in a way that's very like, you know, welcoming and easy and straightforward. But there is evidence that yoga can boost neurotransmitters that promote the relaxation and reduce cortisol. And I think the primary reason for that is because of the body positions you're putting yourself in. So you don't necessarily have to do a yoga class to get the benefits. You can just do some stretching that incorporates some of the movements that stimulate that part of your brain. And that gives you the effect. So an example is a forward fold. So if you were actually threatened, you would not fold forward. So if you can imagine, like, you're in the woods with a bear and your instinct is to fold forward to not be able to see your threat and expose a major part of your body that could kill you, right? So when you put your body in that position, it sends basically biofeedback to the brain that everything must be fine because we're folding forward. You can do that. So that's an example. Meditation is another one. How many of you have tried mindfulness or meditation before? Okay. And tell me somebody who liked it and somebody who didn't like it. Who liked it? Like, okay.
My senior year, I used to use it to go to sleep at night.
Okay.
my brain was loose. But it helped relax me and distract me and give my head instead of
Okay. Did you guys hear what she said? Yeah, okay. She said she used it to go to sleep. There are specific ones for sleep, which are nice, sleep meditations, helped her feel relaxed enough to sleep. Who else liked it? There were some other people, yeah.
I use it mainly for like 10-minute meditation on YouTube for like in the middle of the day. And I still do like tapping. I don't know if like you know about that, but it's really helpful, at least for me. It's basically like just like tap points in your body and it sends signals to your brain to like calm down and process like what's happening in the moment.
Right. Nice, yeah, tapping is a great skill for sure. Okay, anybody else? Thought I saw their hand over here. Anybody from over here? Okay, anybody not like it when they did it? Yes,
I
yes.
wasn't a big fan because there wasn't enough going on for me. I like to think when I do things, like, yeah, something like mindless, like running or something where you don't really have to think. That's what you want.
That's one of the most common complaints. It's like, I can't sit still. I can't, it's, you know, you're like peeking at the clock. How long have I been sitting here? It has to be 3 hours. It's been like 3 minutes or less. And that's obviously in our community, a lot of like go-getter type personalities. So it's very hard to settle down. That's one of the most common things. The other common things we hear are, I get tired when I do it. So I get tired or I feel physical pain are the other two ones. And basically what all that's happening there is we're paying attention to how you actually feel all the time. So it's like, I'm recognizing that I'm in pain and then I'm tired versus I'm gonna, you know, keep going forward and drink as much coffee as possible or whatever, you know, whatever. There is some evidence to support that this is a helpful thing. And at the end, there's some references and lots of very cool articles. So I can really geek out over this. But basically, the gist of it is that the person who researched it was a lot like you. So she was actually a runner and she was doing marathons and she injured herself. So her PT said, you need to go to yoga. And she was like, no, thank you. So, but she wanted to run again. And so that motivated her to go. And then she recognized that she actually felt calmer and better and like more compassionate and kinder to people. Like if someone cut her off, she'd be like, oh, they must be having a bad day, instead of like, you know. And so she's like, there's something to this because I was very resistant. I haven't done anything strange and I'm having these effects. Then she started doing brain imaging to see if there was something going on in the brain. And instead of yoga, she used mindfulness-based stress reduction. So that's a specific program. And Ohio State actually does have, they used to offer it. I don't know if they still do. But Ohio Health offers a class. There's online options for the class and there's books you can read as well. But it's a very specific, let's say, prescription for how much and how you should meditate. And so it's not just like, oh, I'm going to sit for 3 minutes. There is more to it than that. And when she tested people after a 6-week period, this is what happened. This is what she found. So the actual gray matter in their brains changed within 6 weeks, which is very cool. So the amygdala shrunk, which is where your stress is housed. And then these other things grew. So like areas that that show compassion, or how we show compassion in the brain grew, which is, you know, I can't explain that. And I think it's very cool. So anyway, there's lots of evidence that it works. It does take practice. And there's ways you can actually do it not sitting still. So if you want to talk about that after, we can talk about that. So I included some resources with how you could try these things. So there's some online options that are free. Yoga with Adrienne's free. It's online. The RPAC has classes. There's some local, like Balance Yoga and Yoga on High included because they have, I think, a student discount, but also they do like pay what you can. So yeah, so they have that option. And then there's meditation and mindfulness resources that are, some of them are online and podcasts. Has anyone tried the Smart Lab at Ohio State before? Okay, that's biofeedback that helps you learn how to regulate your breathing. So that's also very cool. They hook a little heart rate monitor to your ear, and then you watch a ball go up and down, which shows you your breath. It teaches you how to regulate breath, to regulate heart rate, and the regulation of breath is what helps you have rest and digest. So, and it's free. You can sign up online. They used to be housed by the RPAC. I don't know if they're still there. but that might be something to check out. Okay. So a basic mindfulness practice that I teach people to do all the time in counseling at the vet school is this very basic thing. It takes 2 minutes. So we're gonna do it now. And some of you will be like, that's annoying, but we're gonna do it anyway. So, it's very simple. All you have to do is stop what you're doing. So if you have like computers or things out, it's fine, but just, kind of give it a push it to the side a bit. Thank you. And then notice what you're or notice that you're breathing. So tune into breath. So notice that you have a body that has lungs that breathe, because we don't have to think about that very frequently, if at all, right? So unless our body's giving us information like I can't breathe or I'm feeling weird or something. So just notice you have a body that is breathing. Observe what you are feeling. So you can use any kind of feeling you want, but it should be an emotion or a body sensation. So body sensation example is fatigue. Emotion would be mad, sad, glad, scared. Rate that 0 to 10. So I'll give you a minute to do that. You don't have to think too hard. And then that's it. Then you're done. So you can proceed with what you're doing. So how many of you feel like you go about your day and you don't think about how you're feeling at all or very little? Yeah. So me too. I have to do this on purpose. So the reason why this is helpful is that it helps us to actually recognize when we need something or we need to address a concern related to well-being or stress. It doesn't mean we have to deal with it right that minute. We might be in the middle of something, but it helps us recognize what we're needing. So if we're recognizing I'm feeling tired, it might be helpful to prioritize sleep for the next day or two. If it's I'm feeling lonely, it might be I need to reach out to somebody. If it's I'm stressed, I need to do a coping skill then to reduce the rate that I'm feeling that. And so this simple practice too reduces anxiety a lot. So this is one of the first interventions I'll ask students to do. And then when they come back, they're like, I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And after I did, I felt a little bit better just monitoring myself and paying attention to myself. So it's kind of like if you have a friend that sometimes asks you, how are you doing? How is things going? Or a family member or somebody. It's like doing that for yourself. That actually feels good. So does that make sense? Okay, other thing is to breathe. So I won't go through this, but there's a lot of very helpful breathing exercises. If you Google on YouTube breathing exercises, it will bring up a bunch of options. But in my opinion, it doesn't have to be very fancy. It's just like taking a couple deep breaths can help. Or you can count your breaths if you need something to do with your mind. Another option is to do a square breath. So you breathe in to a count, whatever that is, then try to exhale to the same count. You do want to try to breathe from your belly too, not your chest. So when we're anxious, we breathe from our chest and it's very shallow. When we're calm, we breathe from our diaphragm and they're nice deep breaths. They send nice blood flow to the whole body and the brain, and it feels better to our body. And I gave some options here if you want to click and just try. Okay, some other evidence-based things are gratitude. Does anybody do a gratitude practice on a regular basis, or have you heard of that? So evidence-based to reduce stress and also depression is to take some sort of journal or something to write with, and once a day write 3 things down that you're thankful for that day. Because human nature is that we focus on the negative. It's actually a survival mechanism. And I've noticed that students do that very well. They focus on the negative and they can remove obstacles that are 3 years ahead. It's like and that can be helpful to a point. And also sometimes we get into the habit of only looking at what's wrong. And then we miss all these really great things that are going on, either within ourselves that we're doing or that other people are doing, or even noticing small things like a really good cup of coffee or a fun time with friends or something like that. So yeah. And there are articles that support that. There are people that have researched that. Okay, so this is the most recent data we have on the veterinary profession, which I'll get to why I'm reviewing this in a second. So Merck keeps doing these well-being surveys, which is really nice because they get a lot of, the N is very large, which is awesome. This year they included veterinary staff. So it's not just veterinarians, but they did break it down into sections. So it's veterinarians and veterinary staff. The overall distress increased, which is not a surprise because it was from 2019 to 2022. So what happened in that time? Yeah, we know what happened. And so that's not a surprise. And the key stressors they identified in that time frame were shortage of vets and vet staff. So if you guys heard that you're in a very good job market. So that's a good day. So salaries are increasing and job opportunities are increasing and there's more need for specialists. So to specialize, I'm not saying that's easy, but it's easier than it used to be because we need people to do that. We're lacking in that. And so both vet staff and vets, there's a shortage, but more vet staff. We need more vet staff than we need vets. Student debt is obviously a very big stressor. That's obvious. Burnout, which someone mentioned over here. Yeah. That varies by specialty and age. So the older you are, the less burnout you are. And whomever said it's like old school. So yeah, I think that explains it a little bit in terms of their approach to their profession and how they view mental health. So they might be answering those questions a little differently as well. But the younger you are, the more likely you are to be burnout. Certain specialties are more stressful with burnout. I think that's obvious as well, or probably not news. And then females are more likely to be burnout than males in that. Yeah. And then, like I mentioned earlier, worry about suicide was higher in terms of a concern than actual suicide ideation. So it's more like a what if this happens to me or somebody I care about. And so I found that interesting. So the things that they suggested that we do, okay, is, so this is based on people in the profession saying, if they scored that they were not as distressed, then the things that they indicated that helps them are these things. So first of all is to have at least one healthy technique that they use to enhance well-being, which could be a coping skill, but it also could be a hobby or something you like to do on the weekends that you enjoy or when you're off. Maintaining a healthy work-life balance, which looks different for every person. So we have people at the vet school who love their job and they would be there 80 hours a week and probably are sometimes, and they love that. And that's, to them, that's work-life balance. That's what they want. And then we have other people who do not want that and they want to have a life outside of that. And so it doesn't mean that that has to look a certain way, but that that's working for you. And then the other big piece is debt. So the colleges are trying to address debt. That's obviously a huge thing. And so at Ohio State, we've been continually trying to help students address that, but they recommend a financial planner so that you're not just winging it. So, okay, any questions on that? Okay, this is an overwhelming one. And so I'm not gonna get too into it so I don't overwhelm you, but this is data from a guy named Dan Siegel. So, and he did it with a partner for this study, but he is an expert in stress and specifically PTSD is like his really favorite thing, but it all relates to, you know, stress in general. And so what they researched were the things that make your brain healthy. So when the brain is healthy and functioning, it has blood flow through the whole thing. And that means stress is low because when we're stressed, there's actually constriction between the mid and lower parts of the brain to the front part of the brain. And that's a primal response because if you're in an actual threat, you don't want to think too much. Does that make sense? So like you're in the woods and there's a bear. That's always my example. I don't know why. You don't want to stand there and be like, what do I do? I don't know. Do I call my mom, ask her? Do I Google it? Or, you know, you're wanting to react. And so sometimes students will actually give me an answer. Do you guys know what the answer is? If you see a bear in the woods, it depends what kind. Should we review it now in case we need it? Yeah, you know?
Black bear, you try to act big and scare them away. Grizzlies run. Polar bears are dead.
Yeah. So in case you encounter a polar bear anytime soon. Yeah. Just we're prepared now. I feel better. But yeah, sometimes we'll be like, would you like to know the answer? I'm like, sure. But so what they found were these are the things that make your brain integrated and healthy and as calm as it can be. Now, if you're an adult and you have responsibilities, it is impossible to do these every day, all day, but, or every day, all of them at once. Sorry, let me repeat that because I misspoke. It's impossible to do all of these every day, but that's what they recommend. And so that's why it's kind of overwhelming. So what I suggest to people is pick 3 of them a day. So sleep, exercise, focus time, which is like studying or something like that, where you're in it. Something that you can lose time doing or that you feel very, very engaged. So it doesn't have to be work related. It could be painting or running or something else. Time in, which is self-reflection, journaling, meditation, some kind of spiritual practice could work there. Downtime, which is what it sounds like, but not social media, not doom scroll, not that, but actual relaxation time where you're not doing much of anything, you're just hanging out. Playtime, which is having fun. That having fun is kind of a hot commodity. Like when you're an adult, you have to really make effort sometimes to have fun. And then connecting. So connecting with people you care about, animals. So, make sense? So again, I won't review all these. These are the recommended, so they say, this is what we need. In terms, the ones that have numbers I've been asked before are the ones that are supported by data of how much. So 7 to 9 hours of sleep, 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week. So those are the recommended amounts. Okay, they didn't mention diet at all, which I find interesting. So I included that in here, and so I think it's obvious what we're supposed to do, right? And so some days are better than others, but those are the actual recommendations. And then reducing indulgences. So these are things that make stress worse. So maybe not immediately, like there's some relief from alcohol typically from stress in the short term, but the long term it makes it worse. Okay, so stress isn't bad, I promise. So this is what I was talking about. Sometimes we need stress to help us, and this is old school. This is from the 70s. Have you guys ever seen this before? Yeah. Research was done in the 70s. So that's why the graph looks like it's from the 70s. But we need basically the sweet spot. So in the middle is what we need for optimal performance. We don't want to be too underwhelmed or too unmotivated. And we don't want to be too on the other side. So where we have anxiety, basically. So there is a sweet spot where we need to hum along. Okay, and I'm not gonna make you watch this, but if you're interested, this is a TED Talk. And Kelly McGonigal does research on stress. And the gist of this is that stress is not bad on its own, but the belief that stress is bad is what causes physical illness. So she tracked people who were stressed, and then it was a longitudinal study that she checked death records, which is kind of morbid, right? But she was trying to see what the differences were between people who felt and experienced stress and people who believed that stress was bad, even if they felt normal amounts of stress. And that's what significantly caused more health issues in people was just the belief it's bad. The other thing that she tracked was the resiliency factors that people used. A lot of it was self-talk and positive thinking and or reasonable, rational thinking. And then the other piece of it was connection. So when you're stressed, it's helpful to reach out for help and support from someone because that boosts neurotransmitters in the body to help complete the stress cycle and to help you get rest and digest when you're stressed. So that's like the quick version, but if you're interested to learn more, I would recommend checking out her TED Talk. It's also on YouTube and it's linked here. Okay. So any questions or comments or anything right now? So ideally, what you would be doing now, what we recommend that students coming into our vet school do is start working on stress management tools before they get to vet school. So it's very important that when you come to school, you have at least one thing that you've practiced that you can do to relieve stress. And so that looks different for different people. But if you have that skill already developed, then that's obviously gonna help you when you're transitioning into the vet school experience. So no matter where you go, where you come from, what's going on, the transition is stressful just because it's different and there's change. And there's a period of time, usually within the first like 3 or 4 weeks, where you will have a pretty big spike in stress. So initially there's a lot of adrenaline and people are like excited, and like, I'm gonna do, this is gonna be great, or I'm so thankful I'm here. And then by about week 3, all that wears off. And then there's the oblique moment. Like, oh no, it's not gonna stop, it's gonna keep going. And so if you have one thing that you've practiced prior to coming in, you're already ahead of the game. So I do want you to think about this a little bit as we think about wrapping up. And so I did include, there's a survey that is free, that's in the resources, that you can take to assess yourself. So sometimes, like, I often meet with students sometimes that are like, I've never had anxiety before, but I have it now. But then the more we start talking, they've had anxiety a lot longer. They just didn't know that it was called that, or that felt normal to them. And then it got to a place in school that was significantly higher, so more overwhelming. But if you're not sure where your stress lies, or what that looks like for you, then there's a way to kind of assess that. And then, like I just said, so identify at least one thing that you want to try. And so what I would like you to do, and you can write it down in your phone or whatever you have close to you, but think based on what we already discussed, or something that you know about, because this is not an exhaustive list. In the professional development course for second years this year, we gave them like a 40-slide thing that was like all the things you could possibly do so that they had options. So this is not that. I didn't want to freak anybody out. So it could be something that you already do or that you know about. But one strategy that you'll try in the short term. So we want that to be 14 to 30 days between now and 14 to 30 days from now. You want it to be measurable and realistic. So that's another thing. Sometimes students will be like, I want to exercise more. I think I'm going to train for a marathon. So it's like very big goals, or I should work out every day. And that's not really reasonable. And so and it helps to write it down. So there's evidence that supports that if you write down your goal, you're more likely to achieve it. So if there's something that you're thinking, I would like to try that, I would encourage you to write that down now. And it would be something that you would want to practice on a regular basis for at least a month. And in terms of behavior change, we want to do the same thing for 6 months. So if it's working for you, you'd want to continue that at least 6 months. That helps change habit. So, okay. And then if anybody wants to talk after about, I do want to try this, but I don't know what I think I want to do, I'd be happy to talk with you after. So I'll give you a couple more minutes for that. Okay, and sometimes we do need to ask for help. I mean, so that is why Katie and I are embedded at that school, is because sometimes people just need to talk to somebody and figure that sort of plan out with somebody. So these are free resources you have through Ohio State. The Wellness Center has wellness coaching too, so it's not mental health care, but they can talk about stress and habit change and things like that. So that is also available to you. Okay, questions? Yes.
How accommodating would you say the college is with students that are struggling with mental health? So like, if they have something really big that happens, like a death in the family, is there a way for them to take a break from schooling for a little bit? Or
Yes.
something like that?
Yes, did you guys hear the question? Yeah. So the college is very flexible with mental health concerns, and that is actually one of the changes that has happened in the 6 years that I've worked there. It's one of the sort of things like, hey, we probably need to model good behavior around support and so if a major concern pops up where there's a death in the family or even an illness or something like that, then we will work with them to help them keep moving forward and do what we can to support them through that. Yeah. So COVID was actually a positive in that way because it opened everybody's eyes to like, there's a way to complete coursework that's not here. Or here's how you can show that you're able to remember this information, you're competent. And sometimes students will use breaks to stay on track. So let's say they take a break in fall, they might take exams and things through winter break so that they're able to start spring semester on time, things like that. So yeah, we will work with you as much as we possibly can. Same thing with like, if you are having a mental health concern and there's an exam the next day, same thing, you can request an absence. There's a process to fill out an absence form. And that usually gets approved, almost always gets approved. And then you just take it a couple days later or next week. So those are things that didn't exist before. When I first started, people would show up for exams like with the flu, vomiting flu, and like, I gotta take the exam, it's, you know, and so we've overhauled that because that we do not want students to feel pressure. The exams are kind of higher stake, so we want you to feel like you're ready to take it. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
There was a difference between the current freshman and last year's freshman within the curriculum. How they manage the transition. Was it like the same?
It really doesn't seem that different. There definitely are differences in the curriculum. I will say that the changes in the curriculum, though, in my opinion, are positive. Because historically, we delivered all the information like this. So, or sometimes it's not even this engaging. It would just be like, here, reading the slides kind of thing. And so it is more hands-on. You do have more time, flexibility with your time instead of being in the lecture hall 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. There's more like asynchronous things you can do when you want, and there are required things in person. So changes like that seem to actually be positive. They don't know the difference. So I don't think it's been a major difference in terms of stress or their response to it. We've had about the same in terms of how people are doing in the curriculum. It looks about the same. So it is very different, but they don't know the difference. One of the things that is different, I would say, is the upperclassmen can't help. So they don't know to say like, oh yeah, you know, or yeah, like here's what to expect. They don't have as much of that support. But I can't say that that's been significant. That's a good question too. Yeah.
You deal a lot with imposter syndrome.
Yes. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is very common in all helping professions. And it's actually to a point healthy. So it's part of your professional development. And we do actually assess and grade students on a spectrum with that. So when you're doing things like clinical skills, one of the things we also look for is the student aware of how well they're doing with their clinical skills? So if there are problems, do they know it? Or if there are problems, do they not know it? Does that make sense? So which one do you think is more problematic? So like there's problems and you know it, and you might actually be too hard on yourself with it at times. Or there are problems, but you don't know it. Yeah, so it's actually worse if you're overly confident. And there's an interesting podcast about that with Human Med. There was a doctor that had some mental health concerns, but he was not competent in practicing medicine, and it's about all the medical errors that he made. And it's very interesting. And so we actually try to make sure that if there are concerns, we want you to know that there are concerns. And so there is an aspect of that that's healthy. And then as you go through and develop, you will start to build confidence. So a first year grows a lot between first and second, and then between second and fourth. And then really also when you hone your skills even more is in like about your first 5 years of actual practice. So it's more of, we want you to have a growth mindset that you're starting at a level And then you're progressing through, and especially as a first year, you feel like you don't know at all what you're doing. And so that's very normal. So we do try to also help you tolerate that feeling and trust that it's gonna improve over the course of time with practice. Yeah. For sure.
So when you're talking about like coping skills on the fly,
Mhm.
what do you recommend to students to do as far as practice? If like, say they're having like a panic attack and they're having trouble like regulating their breath and there's just like too much going on, like then maybe they don't have the feel that they don't have the time to exercise or, take a walk or do whatever.
Mhm.
Is there anything that people can do like in the moment?
So in the moment, if you're having a panic attack or you're like extremely stressed, because sometimes it's anxiety attack, not panic, there's different, but it's intense. Really the only things you can do when that's happening is it's called distress tolerance. So getting yourself to a safe location, maybe with a safe person, maybe by yourself, that would be a preference. And doing things to calm down your nervous system. So typically I would recommend somebody have a place in their apartment or where they live that is kind of designated as this is where I feel the most comfortable. So it's usually your bedroom if you live with other people, or the bathroom is another one because no one typically bothers you in the bathroom. I think that's why, it's like the door's shut, I'm leaving you in there. Those are usually the one of the two. And so you would go to that place and do your best to calm your body down. And so if you want to Google it, it's called distress tolerance. There's skills and things that you can practice in that moment. The issue is though, if it's that high, things will not feel as effective. So you have to wait until you come down within a threshold that is more tolerable before things will feel like they're actually helping, if that makes sense. And so sometimes it takes like a day or two until you feel back to yourself because of that too. And so it's kind of tiered. So if you're above what's tolerable, distress tolerance, if you're in a tolerable window, then other coping skills help better, like exercise or talking to somebody or those things. Does that make sense? That's like a quick answer to that, but. Any other questions?
Yeah. I have one more. So just throughout vet school, do you notice a change like generally in students' mental health as they travel through? Is there like, does it reduce or does it spike, or what's kind of the pattern that you notice?
Generally it increases. Yeah. And there's I know, it's like, oh, I know.
There was some up there gonna say decreases, I might say we got this.
No, it doesn't, it increases. So there's data that people collected around that, we did a little bit of that at Ohio State too. We didn't publish it, but we just were curious. And so, yeah, so if you have predisposition right now for any kind of mental health concern, you can expect that will get worse as you adjust. So that's not to say the whole 4 years or more is, miserable and you can't manage it. But initially, as you're transitioning into school, that first year, and this might change, data might change with the new curriculum, but first year and fourth year are the most stressful. So right prior to the new curriculum, that was your initial year and then your clinical year. And then second was second year. And then third year was least stressful. And I think the reason why third year is least stressful, the previous curriculum, is because it's still didactic and you're kind of used to that at that point. You also care less. So we do desensitize you a bit. Or like sometimes I'll say like, I feel bad because we've like beaten it out of you now, you don't care now. But some apathy comes with burnout, that's normal. And so you're a little bit desensitized by third year. And then when you go into the clinic, for some people that's stressful. And some people love that. It just depends. But those are the data that we have. But anything you have pre-existing will get worse. We know that. So that is why we're there. But also why I said, if you know you have these things now, it would be ideal, and I would love it if, if you, because there's mental health people at all the places. And they would love it too, if you got some help before you went to school, because then you have some things in your toolkit already. And then we can use that and adapt it to our environment. Or just start practicing things now that would help. Like I said, one thing, that if you have that one thing, that'll help. So the transition is hard, no matter what. Yeah, it just is, but yeah, gotta be honest, yeah, yes.
Is there any, like, when you see students, like periodically, and you start to see them like kind of not get better, but like the stress levels decreasing, they're starting to cope better, like, what is there a specific like common theme that you see, like, what are they kind of doing when that happens?
When they're feeling better?
Mhm.
Good question. So the most common thing that we see students for is anxiety. And that looks a little different than some of the data in vet med. Like vet med talks a lot about depression, which does exist, but in the vet school, not that people don't have depression, we see more anxiety. And that actually correlates with other grad and professional programs though. So it's not just vet med, it's really the graduate school / professional school concern. So I think Ohio State has actually put out their data on that about here's, you know, the well-being of our professional students and our grad students. So it's really across the board. And so I would say people start to feel better because they've got asked for help. So we do also in our first year, the mental health professionals check on each student. So it's not a mental health appointment. So there's not like lay on the couch and we're gonna, you know, but it's more like, hi, I'm Annie, how are you? Are you okay? What's going on? And some people are like, I'm fine, I don't want to talk to you, and that's fine. But some people do want to talk or say, I actually am kind of stressed, could we meet? And so we check and see how it's going. And so asking for help and talking about it helps, because when you're feeling overwhelmed, something that reduces the shame and the stress around that is like admitting it. And so it's confidential. I can't tell any of the faculty or the deans or anything, any information, unless somebody is a danger to themselves, and it has to be imminent danger. So it's private, they feel better getting that out. And then we identify some very practical solution focused things. Like these are what I want you to do, which usually include stress prevention things. So like you had mentioned, what if I don't have time to exercise, but I want to? We would try to problem solve how to get something going to reduce your stress on a preventative measure. And then also a lot of what I do is helping students metabolize their emotions, because that's not typically taught. So sometimes the students can't even identify what they're feeling or what's going on with them. So it's teaching them how to identify what they're feeling and then metabolize and deal with that. So, and that helps.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. It's also not uncommon for people in the program to pop in and out. So they'll come meet with me for like 5 or 6 sessions, be like, okay, I'm good for a while. And then I'll hear from them again in like a few months or next year or something like that. So sometimes they come in and out. We're intentionally flexible. So we're not like, you're enrolled in the treatment program. And so here's the prescription of what we're gonna do. It's really working with you to identify what you need, what you want, what you have time for, and how we can help support you. That. So.
And are you okay with staying out during the executive session?
For sure.
Any last like public questions?
Yeah, I know it's kind of a private topic also. So if you have questions, I'll hang out after. I did include my email there. So if you have a question, but you don't want to broadcast or like pull me aside, you can send me an email. I will warn you, my legal name is Susanna, so don't freak out, it's me. I need to change that, but I just haven't. So Susanna Abraham will pop up when you plug that in, but that's my email if you have a private question, okay?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.